They thought they could get away with it, that they could humiliate him and he would just go away. But they had no idea who he really was, and what happened next left them speechless. Mark Williams was a typical mid-level guy. He had climbed the corporate ladder at Titan Technologies, rung by rung. Now as head of marketing, he thought he knew everything. He liked things to be a certain way, efficient, predictable, and let's be honest, a bit vanilla. So when a resume landed on his desk that wasn't like that at all, he raised an eyebrow. His name was Jamal Walker, and his qualifications were outstanding. I mean, this guy had the kind of experience that would normally cost you a fortune to get a job. But Jamal was, different. His cover letter talked about community projects, mentoring disadvantaged kids, using marketing for the public good. Mark usually discarded resumes like that, but the guy had a Harvard education, so he thought, okay, let's see what it's all about. Mark leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Okay, Jamal, he muttered under his breath. Let's see if you're as impressive as you think you are. The interview began as usual. Mark asked the usual questions about experience, skills, and career goals. Jamal answered smoothly, confidently, but with a kind of quiet intensity that Mark couldn't understand. But Mark saw something in him, a fire, a passion that he had probably never seen in his employees. Then Mark decided to turn up the heat, deciding it was time to probe the ground. So Jamal, he said, his voice oozing condescending politeness, I see you spend a lot of time working with urban communities. Do you think that experience is really relevant here at Titan Technologies? I mean, we're a global company, not a charitable organization. Jamal froze for a moment, his expression impenetrable. The room tensed. Mark didn't seem flustered, but Jamal didn't react the way they expected. With all due respect, Mr. Williams, he said in an even voice, I believe that understanding diverse communities is essential to any successful marketing strategy. After all, they're consumers too. Mark grinned, shaking his head. Oh, I completely understand, but let's be realistic, Jamal. This is corporate America. We sell products, not save the world. Do you really think your activism is going to succeed here? That's when Jamal moved. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting Mark's. My activism, as you call it, is about creating positive change, and I believe businesses have an obligation to do the same. Jamal replied sharply. He took a slow breath and continued. But let's be realistic. Are you really asking if a black person can work in your white corporate world? Mark's smile flickered for half a second, so quickly that most wouldn't have noticed it, but Jamal saw it. I was just checking to see if you fit in well in our environment, Mark replied. With the intention of regaining control, he leaned back in his chair, folding his fingers into a house. Warren smirked, and the Baron continued. Well, let's put that idea to the test, Jamal said. Let's see if the things I'm passionate about fit. Let's see if your actions demonstrate the same inclusiveness and altruism you preach in corporate leadership. The air in the room seemed to change. Baron didn't back down. Mark, feeling cornered, leaned forward again, his tone sharper. What do you mean? Jamal reached into his briefcase, pulled out a clipboard and placed it on the table. I did a little research on Titan Technologies, he said, scrolling through the screen. Impressive profits, innovative products, but a rather unimpressive history of diversity and community involvement. In fact, your company has faced several lawsuits. Those were isolated incidents, Mark blurted out, already feeling the heat rising to his face. Jamal ignored him, his finger swiping across the screen. And then there's your personal social media, he continued, his voice tinged with amusement. Quite an interesting collection of opinions, shall we say. Mark's eyes widened as he realized what was going on. Jamal wasn't just an applicant, he was studying him. What are you implying? Mark asked, his voice a barely audible whisper. Jamal finally looked up, the shadow of a smile playing on his lips. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Williams. I'm simply pointing out that perhaps Titan Technologies, and you in particular, are not as progressive as you would like people to believe, Jamal continued. But I sense that deep down you believe that. It was at that moment that Mark's cell phone rang. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. It was an email from the CEO. The subject line read, Urgent, contact me immediately. He looked at Jamal again, understanding flashing in his eyes. Who are you? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Jamal stood up, holding out his hand. Someone who believes that actions speak louder than words, Mr. Williams, and one who, I'm going to have a very interesting conversation with your CEO. Jamal stood up and finally smiled. My name is Jamal Walker, but you can call me a change you didn't see coming," he said as he left the room. The next morning, Mark walked into the office dreading the inevitable. The CEO's office was like a black hole, and he was about to be sucked in. What he didn't expect was to see Jamal Walker sitting there, having a friendly conversation with the CEO and board members. The CEO turned to Mark with a serious expression on his face. "Mark, have a seat. Jamal has told us some very enlightening things." The CEO paused for dramatic effect. Jamal had agreed to join the firm as an advisor, special counsel, diversity and inclusion consultant, with the task of overseeing social responsibility initiatives. Mark stared at Jamal, a mixture of shock and disbelief bubbling inside him. But I thought," Mark stammered. Jamal smiled, this time genuinely and warmly. "You thought I was just another job applicant? That's the problem, isn't it? You underestimate people, Mr. Williams. You judge them by appearances, by preconceived notions," Jamal explained to him gently. "You haven't even bothered to look at what I have to offer." The CEO cleared his throat, drawing Mark's attention back to him. "Mark, in light of recent events, we have decided to reassign you," the CEO said, his voice carefully neutral. "You'll be working under Jamal, focusing on internal communications. I think you could use some tightening up." The blood rushed from Mark's face. He'd been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and now he was about to be outranked by the very man he'd tried to humiliate. Mark was about to learn a valuable lesson. Karma has a funny habit of showing up when you least expect it, and that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who will teach you the most. He glanced at Jamal, a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect in his eyes, and then the old man in the work jacket spoke again. "I think that's about to change," Mark admitted, and found himself on the verge of despair.